The new 8 o'clock on CNN. Parker Spitzer, weeknights on CNN.
Well, today started off fairly quiet with just a few scattered demonstrations, but the Interior Ministry made it clear early in the day that no protests would be tolerated. So we saw around town small groups forming, trying to reproduce the massive demonstrations Cairo saw yesterday, but the crackdown was severe. The police, no restraint today, as we saw yesterday, in relative terms, using their clubs, using their water cannons, using rubber bullets and tear gas to try to disperse the demonstrators. But every group they dispersed, another group formed somewhere else. We're hearing that the city of Suez, on the Suez Canal, is in a state of open insurrection against the government, that the police have pulled out of the city, and that they are now burning down things like police stations and ruling party headquarters. So even though the numbers of demonstrators in the streets of Cairo were smaller, it seems that this movement that really began, sparked yesterday, is not losing any momentum.
What are the demands of the protesters, if they can be discerned or known at this time? And is there even an organization there to make demands?
Well, there's not really an organization. What we have is something probably unique in history. We have Facebook groups that have formed, two big ones, and they had some basic demands. They want a minimum wage, they want an end to police brutality, an end to corruption, and more than anything, what you hear from people in the street is one single, very profound demand. They want the ouster of President Hosni Mubarak, who's been ruling this country longer than most Egyptians have been alive. Elliot?
And is there any possibility that Mubarak would either resign, and who is there to take over? What would happen if he were to step down? Is there an alternate government? His son has been apparently slated to take over. What could possibly happen?
Well, there's a whole variety of scenarios, all of which have a lot of question marks around them. First of all, President Mubarak has not uttered a word in public since these demonstrations happened, which is causing a good deal of concern, causing some people to think that the government is simply losing its grip at the moment. He has no vice president. He's been president since 1981 and has always refused to appoint one, saying that the people will decide. Well, the people haven't had a chance to decide this matter. There's a lot of talk about his son, Gamal Mubarak, a businessman, a banker in his mid-40s, taking over. But Egyptians across the board have rejected that option. They say we are, after all, a republic, not a monarchy. They don't want that sort of system. There's always the option that the army can take over, but that is something most people don't really think is possible unless the situation goes out of control.
Was there any intimation, was there any evidence that this could erupt in a place like Egypt?
I have to confess that I and all of my colleagues in the press corps here and all the protesters I spoke with, nobody predicted that it would get so big, so fast, and throughout the country. It's taken everybody by shock. The police as well. They didn't expect this. And there were reasons for popular discontent. Police brutality, corruption, a president that's been in power since 1981. But nobody thought that this would happen so dramatically, so quickly.
What has the press coverage of these revolts been and these protests? Has it been supportive? Has it led to larger and larger protests building up in different neighborhoods?
All right. This is الأهرام. This is the state paper, sort of the gray lady of Egypt. Top story, riots and unrest, but it's not in Egypt, it's in Lebanon. Mm-hmm. The Egypt protests is below the fold. This is referring to yesterday. Here is another newspaper, المصري اليوم. Here you have top story, great big red headline, says warning. Complete sort of comprehensive coverage, very positive about the protest. So two completely different ways of looking at the demonstrations. And this really gives you an idea of the chasm between the official stance on these demonstrations and the more sort of independent, popular view of what they mean and where they're going.
It seems that the communication between or among the protesters is on Twitter, is on Facebook, is on social media. Is there any way for the government to shut that down?
Well, one important thing to point out is that Egypt has never put any blocks on the internet. Egyptians can go to any site they want. However, yesterday, during the protest, Twitter suddenly was blocked, and that was one of the main forms of spreading information and spreading news about Egypt. Egyptian officials insist they did nothing. They say that the system was overwhelmed and it simply didn't function in Egypt. And what's interesting is that just about an hour and a half ago, mid-evening in Cairo, the Twitter page was working again. But Twitter and Facebook, things like text messages, have been key to spread the word, to organize these demonstrations, and to keep them going, and to spread information. So Egyptians, even at these demonstrations, they're half the time chanting, the other time they're looking down at their mobile phones to read text messages, to check Facebook, to check Twitter. So it's a very techie revolution, if we can call it that.
Who are the protesters?
There are students, workers, housewives. You see middle-aged couples coming out to chant down with Mubarak. There are Christians, there are Muslims, there are Islamists. There are sort of every sector of Egyptian society. And what's interesting is that the Muslim Brotherhood, the largest political opposition bloc in Egypt, is not taking part in these demonstrations. They're taking part as members, but as a group, it declined to participate. And what this really is at least until now, is a secular movement. It has no religious undertones.